This past weekend, I got back from Victoria, which is on Vancouver Island. I recently got to spend some time with Adam, who was the third place guy from Pandaland, who I got to know over in China. And so kind of got talking to him over social media and get to know him over in Chengdu, China. Really liked the guy, and so showed up because he has a lot of experts in the field around him that were going to be super beneficial to me showing up. So we're going to be going over 4 separate movements, and in those movements we have a lot of subtopics inside them. First one we're going to talk about is Snatch. So Adam obviously has Olympic weightlifter for many, many years, competed at that level, and is pretty solid at snatching. And as we all know, if you've ever watched me snatch, you know it's probably not the greatest and it's not very pretty. And there are things I could fix to make myself more efficient. And so we talked about some ways. We worked a lot over the past couple days. I was there and did a lot of snatching and did a lot of drills and learned a lot of things. So I want to cover the things I learned from Snatch that you might find also beneficial if you are like me and lift like me or are like me.
For shizzle.
The first thing I learned, which was the easiest fix to have, was my hook grip. I was hook gripping the bar wrong. And I know what you're saying to yourself. You're literally doing the first thing wrong. Well,
you tossers! You had one job to do!
Well, at least we know we can improve, right? And so when I was grabbing the bar, I was really, I don't have a PVC pipe here, I was really death gripping the bar. Like the bar was high in my hand, it was as deep as I can get it on my hand, and I was death gripping that bar, trying to rip that thing off the floor. And the problem with that what I was doing was I was, try to grab your thumb and death grip something. Well, what happens? Well, you tense up from your wrist all the way up to your shoulder, right? You tense up like, ugh. And that's what I was doing. Because I was death gripping the bar and tensing up, there's where my early arm bend came from. There's where me kind of pulling it like this instead of like being a little bit relaxed in my arm. I was death gripping it and having this early arm bend. And so number one was hook grip. And you might be asking yourself, okay, what was the fix? You're not death gripping it, so what were you doing? Well, Adam taught me the way how he snatches was he has a very long grip on the bar. And when I say long, I mean the bar's not super death grippy into his hand. Instead, it's really like long, his hand's really like elongated out. So instead of having it really deep in his palm, he was actually barely gripping his thumb, where I was like grabbing it with like 3 fingers across my thumb when I hook grip. He was barely hook gripping that bar with like 2 fingers on his thumb. And what that allows him to do is his hand's really long. And I kept asking him, I'm like, okay, well, doesn't the bar slip out? Like you don't have a whole lot of grip on it. And he's like, well, no, because bar is going down because of gravity, right? And so it's the more weight it is, the harder it is to pick up the ground. Therefore, it pushes my thumb against my fingers. Therefore, I don't let go of the bar when I'm snatching. Now, I want to caveat and say this. We actually talked about it. He might actually change up his grip if we were doing like a Randy. So if we were doing like 75 snatches at 75 pounds, it would be a little bit different probably than a 1 RM snatch. It's just a little bit different because it's a little bit lighter. So number one, my hook grip. I was super death grippy. I was gripping that bar, tensing up, and not having relaxed arms and having a long grip on my hook grip. So that was the first thing I learned. Next thing, a couple things I learned was the idea of staying over the bar longer. Like I have, if you've ever seen me, you've seen that I have really big erectors on my back, and they're cool looking, look like shark fins, but at the same time I have them because I'm compensating somewhere, and that compensation occurs from me throwing back, right? So instead of staying over the bar longer and then going into a more vertical pull, I was instead leaning back and losing all my power, and depending upon my erectors, I throw that bar overhead. And then as we all know, that bar doesn't have a very straight path, right? It's kind of like a big curly Q, which isn't very straight at all if you ask me. So anyways, staying over the bar longer, a more vertical path, and then activating the lats was the other one. And all those things, I'm actually going to fix using blocks. And so that's something I'm going to tell you what I did wrong and then how I'm going to fix it, right? So one thing we really talked about was using blocks from the floor allows you to really focus on that specific movement and that specific timing and forgetting about everything else, right? So, instead of just snatching from the floor all the time, blocks allow you to focus on one specific portion, sequence of the lift. And so blocks. We worked on a lot of blocks over the course of like an hour, we just did block work, and we worked with like 75 pounds, 95 pounds, and 135. And we did like low blocks, 75, 95, 135. And then medium blocks, 75, 95, 135. Then high blocks, 75, 95, 135. And then we worked down all the way back down to the floor, actually. So it was like 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches. And at the end of it, he was really stressing me staying over the bar. So in my setup on the blocks, which again, sequencing from the floor isn't the first thing. Like I have to pick up from the floor first, but the blocks allow me to start higher. For my setup from the blocks, I could stand, be aggressive over the bar, be a little bit more over the bar than I was in my regular snatch stance or regular snatch sequence from the floor, if you ask. And so that was really cool. Doing those block works and then bringing it back down to the floor and being able to snatch on the floor, I felt a lot faster. I feel like I was staying over the bar longer. I was a little bit quicker. And so that was huge.
Nice. That felt good. That was awesome. Stop. Yeah, no. Stop that. Okay, cool.
The last thing for snatch that we're going to work on is probably not hitting so high of percentages so often. And that's not necessarily like a coach thing or a programming thing. Sometimes that's an athlete thing. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's not the programmer or the coach who's programmed for you wrong. He's probably, hopefully, giving you the right percentages. But it comes down to an athlete thing. Like if I feel good or you feel good snatching, sometimes you're like, well, I feel really good. I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep going up in weight. And you don't really stick to your percentages when you should be sticking to them. And what Adam really stressed to me was the idea that speed is really important in a snatch. And I know this, but it was good to have it told to me again. And speed's really important for a snatch. And so working on your 50 to 70% is really important at 50, like 74, because that's where you develop your speed at. And so then when you decide to go a little bit heavier into the 80% or whatever the case may be, you still keep that speed. He's like, because if you only work at heavy weights, so if you only work at 80% plus all the time, and when I say this, let me clarify, like your working sets are only 80% plus, because a lot of us will hit a 50% snatch, but it's like, oh, I'll hit one snatch at 50%, one at 60, one at 70. Now I'm going to start my working sets at 80. And what he's saying is, if that's what you do all the time, you're not going to get any faster. He's like, you might actually get slower because you're going to be used to that 80%, and you might get strong doing that, but you're not going to get any faster. And so you can't progress. And in order to get heavier weight, improve your snatch, you have to get faster. And so that was one thing we really talked about. And that's a really easy fix, right? The easy fix is don't snatch really heavy that often. Focus on lightweight and speed, and doing it right. So those are my kind of key items I learned from snatch. Now we're going to go on to the clean and jerk. All right, so we're going to talk about the clean and jerk now. What I learned from Adam for the clean and jerk. First of all, we'll start with the clean because clean's first. My clean isn't bad. I was actually impressed. He told me that. My clean is not bad. The one thing that I need to fix going forward for a clean, and that you might have too also, is your posture at the beginning of the clean and how your setup is. For your clean, you need to be sitting more vertical and sitting back further, and your hips a little lower than as opposed to the snatch. And what I was doing was I was treating the snatch the same as my clean and jerk or my clean. And so my stance was probably pretty similar to my clean as it was to my snatch. And I thought, okay, well, it's the same kind of movement. They should be the same stance. Not true. So we worked on a more vertical sitting position and lowering our hips a little lower and sitting more vertical in that clean position to start off on the floor, that initial pull. And we stayed pretty light. I think we only worked at like 225 pounds, but it felt really snappy. And at that time, I was actually sick and had a fever, and I felt pretty snappy when I was sick and had a fever. So if it works when I have a fever, it probably is going to work when I don't have a fever. And so that's one thing we're going to easily fix the cleans going forward, is sitting a little more vertical in your clean. And when I say clean, I mean a full clean. Adam did stress to me that when I am power cleaning, your stance will probably revert back to less of a vertical stance because your power cleaning is a little bit different. So now let's go on to the jerk. So for the jerk, if you guys have watched me jerk my blocks over here, one thing that I do a lot of is I'm fighting against myself, which means when I jerk, when I do my dip, I do a real quick dip and I don't let the bar fully catch up. So what's happening is I do a quick dip and I go, which is a dip, don't get me wrong, but when I dip, I need to let the bar catch up and then the bar to bend back up to go with it, and instead, I'm dipping so fast, the bar is still trying to go down and I'm trying to go up, so I'm fighting against the bar when I should be dipping a little bit slower, a little smoother, let the bar bend, and then go up with it, right? And so the things we're going to work on for the jerk is a less jerky dip. I know, right? So impressive. So a less jerky dip, meaning more of a smooth, slower dip. And then also one thing I've been known to do is I've been known to dip a little bit too far, so we're going to stay a little bit more of a shallow dip. And then on the catch position, two of the things I do wrong in my catch is I usually spread my feet out. My base is too long. He's like, Jacob, one thing you need to work on is you need to have faster feet and go. If you have fast feet, you can catch it higher. If you catch it higher, you're more stable. So we're going to be working on faster feet and a higher catch position and also a little bit less forward. So usually when I'm jerking, because if you guys watch videos from the side, you can tell this, is the idea that I will jerk and I'm usually out here. So what happens, I feel the bar out in front, when in actuality I should be over here sitting more over my center of mass, which I don't do usually. And so we're going to be working on faster feet for the jerk, which is just going to be doing jerk balances, jerk drills, stuff like that. Sometimes just a dip and replace. And so we're going to be doing on that to get faster feet and be a little bit over center of mass and also a tighter catch position and not so wide and deep, or deep and wide. And that's clean and jerk. The next thing we want to talk about is swimming. We spend a lot of time swimming. Adam has a swim coach, Kylie, who I believe is like an internationally ranked triathlon athlete coach. I don't know. I'm not from the triathlon world. You can tell I'm too heavy for it. But anyways, so we looked at some swimming drills. We did some swimming drills with her. Super helpful to have her there in person. And so I learned some things that I do that are easy to fix that I was doing completely wrong. We're just going to cover one of them. And that was the idea that when you exhale, when you're swimming, right? So obviously you have to breathe. I'm inhaling, I'm exhaling, right? When you're exhaling, you're obviously exhaling underwater, right? Because you don't want to be swimming and then you're rotating and you're exhaling and inhaling at the same time because there's not enough time, you're trying to go. You should have exhaled under the water and then inhale over the water. I was doing that right, okay? I was exhaling underwater and then inhaling the oxygen above the water, you know. I was doing that right at least, thank the Lord. But what I was doing wrong was the process of my exhalation. Instead of doing one big, stroke, sorry if I blew the mic out, stroke, big exhale, and then turn and inhale, I was instead exhaling slowly over a long period of time. So instead of going stroke, I was instead doing which has a couple different wrong things. Number one, which we'll get into, is breathing. Number one, it's hard to really brace when you're constantly blowing out air, right? You're constantly giving out oxygen. So then when you finally try to release the rest of the carbon dioxide, try and do that. Like, it's easier to just go and blow all your oxygen out or your carbon dioxide out, right? But it's harder to go like you're emptying your lungs, almost like you're exhaling and then you're emptying your lungs on top of it, and that's more difficult. So it was difficult for me to get a full vital lung capacity because I was slowly exhaling and then trying to empty my lungs and then trying to open up and inhale. So I wasn't getting the full lung capacity of oxygen on my inhale. And then on top of that, the worst thing was oxygen, as we know, or any kind of air in your body allows me to become more buoyant in the water, right? I can float more. Well, if I let out my oxygen or let out my carbon dioxide, let out whatever's inside of my body, any kind of air in my body, I'm going to sink in the water. So what was happening was I was swimming along, right? And then if I'm slowly letting out my air over the course of 3 to 5 strokes, I'm going right? So in a graph-wise, I'm slowly going down like a negative slope, and then I'm jumping back up like a stepwise, then I'm slowly going down, then a stepwise. Whereas instead, if I can just stroke, exhale at one time, and then inhale pretty much at the same time, then I'm going, which allows me to stay more on top of the water and more in control. If I'm slowly sinking, I'm going to start freaking out. And so that was one big thing for me. So I practiced that. It was an easy change to, instead of going, I instead could go, and that was a big change that was really easy to make. So if you struggle with that, there's a swimming change you can make that's really simple, and I think it'll be hugely beneficial. The next thing I want to talk about, and was something that was huge for learning, was breathing. And so when Adam got a hold of me, he goes, hey, Jake, you're going to come in and we're going to do some snatching. He goes, we'll also do some, I have a swimming coach if you want to join. And I was like, cool, definitely do a swimming coach. And he's like, we'll also have a breathing coach.
Stop being a smarty pants, all right?
And at first I was like, yo, Adam, like, I'm going to be 30 in March. So obviously I have 29 years of experience breathing, so I probably don't need help. No, that's what I was thinking, But then I said, you know what? That's a kind of a prideful response, even though Adam and I laughed about it later. So I said, you know what? I'll just say yes. I said, yeah, I tell you what, Adam. I said, I'm kind of mainly coming here to learn how to snatch. So there's added swimming bonus in there is cool. Some added jerk bonuses there is cool for learning that. But, if you bring your breathing coach in, I'll spend 20 minutes with him. We'll see if I learn anything. If I don't, I'll just never see him again. No big deal. And so Adam's like, cool, I'll invite him in. So the guy comes in, his name's Kevin. So Kevin comes in, who I actually called Kevin for a whole hour because I didn't know his name was Kevin. I felt really bad after it. We laughed about it later. But Kevin came in, he's a breathing coach. And at first, I was like, this is going to be stupid. Right? You're going to teach me how to breathe? I know how to breathe. Watch me do an aerosol bike. I'll show you how to breathe. But it wasn't the kind of breathing I was normally used to. Instead, it was learning how to breathe and brace for lifts.
Part of what you want to do, but ideally, instead, what I want you to do is I want you to think about your core pop can with cables to create more stability. But when you're here, you're overextending, you're walking your back to the end range, and firing that, which screws up your shoulder position, screws up your back position, and you're not nearly as efficient. Okay? So if we go here, now your core is correct, your torso is more upright. Right? And then what's going to happen is you're going to have proper shoulder mobility to be able to do your position,
might be awkward,
and you're going to use way less effort in the end because it's going to be more efficient, right?
We spent an hour that day breathing, and I learned a crap ton. And he came back 2 other days and learned an hour worth of that. And he taught me a lot about diaphragm breathing. And I'm not going to be an expert on this. Don't sit here and think I'm an expert on this field. I'll attach his Instagram page, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other documents out that you guys can find and read about from experts. But for me, it was learning how to brace better. And the one thing he showed me right off the get-go is he showed me how to push my ribs down, kind of let my ribs drop by sighing, right? So let my ribs drop, and then breathing deep and breathing low.
Knees open like this. Okay? Keep your ribs down and flat. Breathe out. Fill into these fingers. Okay, good.
And what I mean by that is breathing down deep in your stomach, almost to like your lower stomach, like way down in the abdomen area, whatever you want to call it. I'm not an expert. And he taught me how to breathe down deep and to brace, whether it was like bracing with 25% and breathing through it, bracing with 50% and breathing through it, or bracing at 100% for like a 1 rep max lift. And so the first day he taught me how to do that. And it was, I'm going to be honest to goodness, after an hour of doing that and learning how to do that, it fired muscles I had never used in my life before.
Keep that core braced and then just stand up. Perfect. And go again. And just stand up from that proper brace. Yes. Keep it a little bit more tight. You want to try not to do that and separate like you, right?
And I'm asking myself, man, I've done this CrossFit for years. If you were been like, Jacob, let's do hollow rocks for an hour, I would have been sore, don't get me wrong. But this was a different kind of sore. This was like a sore like, wow, you've never used this before. This is absolutely crazy what I'm being taught. And so we learned that. And so I learned how to kind of breathe low to side, drop my ribs, and breathe kind of low in my belly down here, kind of like a big, muscle belly kind of thing, like a turtle shell kind of concept. And so we learned that. And the next day, it was kind of the icing on the cake. He goes, look, Jake, he goes, I watched some of your videos last night, again, and when you clean, he goes, I bet when you clean, you take that belt and you strap that sucker on as tight as you possibly can go, and you go get it. I go, yeah, that's definitely how I clean. And he goes, I want to show you an example. I said, okay. So he lays me down. I lay on the ground. He's facing up, and he's laying near the end of my feet. And he goes, okay, Jacob. He goes, I want you to put your belt on, and I want you to tighten it like you're going to do a 1 rep max clean. I said, okay. So I tighten that sucker down. I can't even barely breathe, right? I don't need a core. I just need that belt strength. And so we tighten the thing up. I lay on the ground. He goes, okay, now pick your feet off the ground. So I pick both my feet off the ground. I'm facing up again. And he goes, I'm going to grab one of your legs. I'm going to push your leg in. I want you to resist me and keep pushing your leg out. So kind of, here's my legs. Here's my legs. Here's my legs. He's pushing my legs in. I'm trying to push it out, right? I said, okay. So I have my belt on. So he pushes it in, and I can barely resist him. And he goes, yeah, that was pretty pathetic. And I'm like, okay, cool. He goes, now take off your belt, or loosen your belt. Keep your belt still on, but 20% looser so you can breathe with it. And now breathe and brace like I taught you. Shut your ribs down, tighten that up, that pop can. He called it a pop can. I like that. Tighten that pop can up, put a lot of pressure into it. Brace against your side walls, breathe into your back. He goes, and now do it. And I was super surprised. I did that. My belt was not even close as tight as it was the first time, and I was able to actually resist him pushing my foot in. And it was huge to me to be thinking to myself, man, this changes everything. Like, I usually, when I do a 1 max front squat or 1 max back squat or deadlift or whatever the case may be, I'm clean, I'm tightening my belt up to Timbuktu. And now instead, I don't need to do that. I just need to keep my belt somewhat tight and learn how to breathe and brace into my belt. And for me, the breathing thing was really cool. It was really eye-opening because, like learning how to snatch, change some stuff up in snatch was important, don't get me wrong. And changing stuff up for swimming was important, don't get me wrong. But learning the breathing was something that was completely new because I came in with the idea of how to snatch and I came in with the idea of how to swim. But you might say to yourself, well, you came in with the idea of how to breathe, and that's true, but not breathe like this. This was completely something I wasn't used to. And I think after some practice there, I need to practice it more here. Like, so one of the things he taught me and says to do is, look, he goes, I recommend you wear a belt when you're doing stuff, even if you don't need to wear a belt, because it's still important to have that belt really loose so you can breathe into it and feel that and get that stimulus of, okay, I'm breathing into my belt, because you can't really feel yourself breathe into something if you don't have something around your abdomen. And so that's something we're going to try, and I think something we're going to practice a lot at home is being able to put some pressure into that pop can, per se, like Kevin taught me, and breathing into my back and breathing into my side walls and breathing down deep and lowering my ribs. So yeah, that was really cool to learn that breathing process. I know there's a lot of CrossFit games out there that already know that and have been taught that by certain breathing coaches. Honestly, I was one of the guys that made fun of that probably. And now here I am saying, that was really cool. So those are kind of my 4 major things. If you're still watching this, thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. Put the comments down below because you're awesome. Those are kind of 4 major movement things I learned, whether it was snatch or clean and jerk or swimming or breathing. There's some big things I learned in Canada. Just want to say thanks to everybody out there, Adam, Kevin, Kylie, for spending some time with me to teach me how to swim better, teach me how to snatch better, teach me how to breathe better, for instance. That was really cool and really awesome. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Catch you guys later. See you.